What if the biggest regret of your life is the family you didn't know you had when Ethan returns to Portland? He's not just reconnecting with a lost love, he's about to meet the daughter he never knew existed. And the journey of a lifetime begins. Ethan Walker had built an empire from the ground up. Real estate was his world. As a young man, he'd taken risks, invested in properties others wouldn't touch, and now he reaped the rewards. But after 8 years, the city of Portland, Oregon, called him back. And this time, it wasn't just about business. He stood outside the newly acquired hotel. Its grand, old brick structure looked like it belonged to a different era, with ivy creeping up the walls and an old-fashioned sign hanging above the entrance. Ethan couldn't help but smile. It was a place that had seen years of history, a place full of potential. But there was something else here, something far more personal. This was the place he and Claire had once talked about back before everything changed, before Ethan's sudden departure, before the silence between them had stretched on for far too long. Claire Harrison. She had been the woman he thought he would marry. They'd dreamed of a life together, one built on love and trust. Until one day, he'd walked away, no explanation, no goodbye. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. But the reasons, buried deep inside him, seemed necessary at the time. Ethan had never imagined he'd return to find her here, working as the head housekeeper of this very hotel. His heart beat faster as he walked through the front door. The air was heavy with memories of the past, and his steps felt heavier as he approached the reception desk. And then, there she was, Claire, standing behind the desk, her expression unreadable. Time hadn't softened her beauty. In fact, it made her seem even more distant. A stranger wearing the same face he once loved. Ethan's breath caught. This was the moment he'd been dreading. As Ethan made his way to the lobby, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the surprise of seeing Claire again. It was the sense that fate had a hand in bringing him back to this very spot. There was an undeniable pull toward her, one that he hadn't felt in years, but it was quickly overshadowed by the unease gnawing at him. Claire's gaze met his, and for a fleeting moment, everything seemed to freeze. The weight of the years between them, 8 long years, hung heavy in the air. Her eyes, once so full of love, now seemed distant, guarded. She was the same Claire he remembered, but there was a coldness, a hardness to her that he hadn't expected. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice steady but laced with something Ethan couldn't place. "I wasn't expecting you today." Ethan forced a smile, his words sticking in his throat. "I didn't plan on it either," he replied. "I guess we both have a lot to catch up on." Her expression softened slightly, but it didn't last long. The small talk that followed felt strained, like they were both dancing around something neither wanted to confront. But Ethan wasn't here for pleasantries. He had come for answers. "How's everything here?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Claire nodded, her professional demeanor slipping back into place. "Everything's running smoothly. The staff's been great, and the place has potential." But Ethan's mind wasn't on the hotel anymore. It was on the little girl he had seen earlier, playing near the lobby. Her blonde hair caught the light as she twirled, and her laughter echoed through the room. Something about her looked familiar. Too familiar. The blue eyes sharp. Striking blue eyes instantly reminded him of someone. "Who's the little girl?" Ethan asked, his voice lower than intended. Claire's face immediately tightened, a flicker of panic crossing her features before she masked it with a neutral expression. "That's Lucy," she said, her voice quieter now. "She's my daughter." Ethan's heart dropped. Lucy. The name meant nothing to him, but those eyes, those unmistakable reed eyes, said everything. He stared at Claire, his mind racing. "Wait, what do you mean? Your daughter?" Claire hesitated for a moment, then let out a soft sigh. "She's yours, Ethan." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His hands gripped the edge of the counter for support, but his mind was reeling. A daughter. He had a daughter. The room seemed to tilt around him. Ethan had never felt more out of control in his life. Ethan stood frozen, the words Claire had just spoken reverberating in his mind. "She's yours." He couldn't wrap his head around it. For 8 years, he had lived a life that had been defined by ambition, chasing after success, always thinking about the next big deal, the next property to acquire. But never, not once, had he thought about the life he had left behind until now. Claire's face softened, but there was no warmth in her eyes. "I didn't want to tell you this way, Ethan. I wanted to protect you. I wanted to protect her." Ethan blinked, trying to process what he was hearing. "How could you keep something like this from me?" His voice was thick with a mix of disbelief and anger. But underneath it, there was something else hurt. He had been betrayed. Yes, but more than that. He had been excluded from the most important part of his life. Claire's shoulders slumped, the weight of the years seeming to press down on her. "It wasn't my choice," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your family, your father, they made sure I couldn't reach you. I couldn't even tell you I was pregnant. They threatened me. Ethan, they told me that if I ever reached out to you, I'd never see Lucy again. They kept me moving from place to place, forcing me to cut ties with you. You wouldn't have believed me anyway. I had no choice." Ethan's jaw tightened as the words sank in. His father. The very man who had always seemed to be in control of every aspect of Ethan's life. The man who had pushed him into real estate, who had dictated every move Ethan made. To think that this same man had also been responsible for keeping him away from his daughter, that he had manipulated Claire into silence for years, left him sick to his stomach. "I never knew." "Claire," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "I never knew." Claire nodded, the pain evident in her eyes. "I know, but you need to understand something. Ethan, I didn't want this for either of us. I didn't want to hide our daughter from you, but they made sure I couldn't come to you. I didn't have a choice." Ethan's mind was in turmoil. He had just learned that he was a father, and not only that, but that his own family had played a role in keeping him from his daughter. The realization hit him hard. He had to make things right. He didn't know how, but he couldn't walk away from this now, not again. "Where is she?" Ethan asked, his voice steady now, though a fire had begun to burn within him. "I need to see her." Claire hesitated, but then nodded, leading him toward the small play area in the back of the hotel. As they walked, Ethan's mind raced. He had to fix this. There was no turning back. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly as Claire led Ethan toward the back of the hotel. His steps grew heavier with each passing second. It wasn't the weight of the building's old wooden floors beneath his feet that was dragging him down. It was the weight of everything he'd just learned. When they reached the small play area, Lucy was sitting on the floor, her back to them, as she built a small tower with colorful blocks. Her blonde hair shone under the overhead lights, and when she turned to face them, Ethan saw those blue eyes, the same eyes that had always haunted his dreams. The same eyes that now belonged to a daughter he didn't know he had. Lucy stood up slowly, her gaze lingering on Ethan as though she was trying to figure out who this stranger was. Ethan felt a pang of guilt deep inside. What had he missed? What had he lost? "Lucy," Claire said gently, kneeling down beside the girl. "This is your dad." Ethan knelt in front of her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hey there," he said softly, trying to mask the uncertainty in his voice. "I'm Ethan. I'm your dad." Lucy tilted her head, her brow furrowing as if she didn't quite understand what that meant. Ethan could see the confusion in her eyes. She was only a child, caught between the past she had known and this new reality being thrust upon her. "I didn't know about you," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "I never wanted to be away from you. Lucy, I'm so sorry." Claire watched from a distance, her face unreadable. But Ethan could see the tension in her posture. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment, waiting for him to face the consequences of the choices that had been made all those years ago. Ethan stood up, his mind spinning. Everything he had worked for, every ambition, every property he had acquired, none of it mattered now. This was his reality, his family, and he had a long road ahead to make things right. As the silence stretched on, Ethan realized that this wasn't just about reconnecting with his daughter. This was about rebuilding his life, about facing the mistakes he had made, and about taking responsibility for the things he had left behind. He looked at Claire. "We need to talk. I need to fix this. I can't just walk away again." Claire nodded slowly, her eyes meeting his for the first time since their reunion. The old wounds were still there, but maybe, just maybe, they could begin to heal. The next few days passed in a blur for Ethan. He found himself torn between the rush of his past and the pull of this new, unexpected future. Every decision, every word, felt heavier now, each one carrying the weight of what he was trying to rebuild. The hotel, the business, the life he had once been so focused on, now felt like a distant memory. What mattered most now was Claire, Lucy, and the life he had been blind to for so long. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan stood on the balcony of the hotel, looking out over the city. Portland was as beautiful as ever, its skyline a silhouette against the setting sun. But something had changed in Ethan. The city no longer felt like his kingdom. It felt like a place he had outgrown. Claire joined him, leaning against the railing beside him, her arms crossed. She said nothing at first, but the silence between them was comfortable, like two people who had been through storms and finally found a moment of peace. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, breaking the quiet. His voice was low, but there was a newfound resolve in it. "I don't want to just fix things with Lucy. I don't want to just walk away from the life I've built. But I don't want to keep living in the same way, either." Claire raised an eyebrow, her eyes wary. "What are you saying?" "I want us to start over," Ethan said, his voice steady now. "I want us to build something new, a new life, a new hotel, not just for me, but for you, for Lucy. I've been running my whole life. I thought I was building something, but I wasn't. I was building a future that didn't have any of you in it." Claire turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable. "Start over. After all this time? Yes. Ethan replied, without hesitation. I've already lost too much time. I can't make up for what I missed. But I can make sure that the rest of my life counts for something real, something that matters. I want to create a place where we can all be together. A new hotel at Lighthouse Beach. Somewhere we can rebuild not just the business, but our lives, too. Claire looked at him for a long moment, weighing his words. There was hesitation in her eyes, but it was mixed with something else. Maybe hope, maybe curiosity. I don't know, Ethan, she said quietly. It's a big leap. I know, Ethan replied. But I'm ready to take it. For all of us. The silence between them stretched again. But this time, it wasn't the same kind of silence. It was filled with possibility. Claire nodded slowly, her voice soft. Okay, let's talk more about this. We'll see where it goes. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was heading in the right direction. And maybe, just maybe, this new chapter wasn't just about business. It was about family. It was about rebuilding what had been broken and creating something better than what had been lost. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of planning, decisions, and small victories. Ethan and Claire threw themselves into the project of the Lighthouse Beach Hotel, the foundation of which felt symbolic of everything they were trying to rebuild. The beachside location, with its sweeping views of the ocean and the promise of something fresh, offered the perfect backdrop for the new life they were trying to create. For Ethan, it wasn't just about the hotel anymore. It was about proving to Claire and to himself that he could be the man she had once known, the man she had once loved. But the journey wasn't easy. Every decision he made, every move he took in the business world, was now intertwined with the family he had left behind. He had to balance the demands of the hotel with the realities of fatherhood, a role that was as new to him as the fresh paint on the walls of the hotel. There were moments of doubt, especially when the old habits crept in. The long hours, the emails, the never-ending tasks. Ethan found himself slipping back into the patterns that had consumed him before. But then, every time he looked over at Claire or saw Lucy's face light up as she ran down the beach, it pulled him back. It reminded him that the real work was in the people, not just the business. Claire, too, was changing. She was no longer the guarded woman he had first encountered after all these years. There was a softness in her eyes now, a hint of trust beginning to creep back in. She had been through so much protecting Lucy, hiding from the past, living in fear, but now, as they worked together, it was clear that something had shifted. She wasn't just building a hotel anymore. She was building a future with Ethan and Lucy, something that was rooted in honesty, in second chances. And Lucy Sweet. Curious Lucy was the bridge between them all. Every time she laughed, every time she pulled Ethan into a game of tag or showed him her latest drawing, he was reminded that this was the most important work of all. He was learning to be the father she deserved. Slowly but surely, the pieces of their broken family were starting to fit together. There were still challenges ahead. The hotel wasn't finished yet, and they still had a long road to walk before everything was in place. But for the first time in years, Ethan felt hope, real hope. Not the kind that came from a financial deal or a successful investment. This was different. It was the kind that came from building something meaningful with the people who mattered most. Together, they were creating a future. Together, they were healing. And together, they would face whatever came next. The day the hotel officially opened its doors. It wasn't just a business milestone. It was the symbol of everything Ethan and Claire had worked for. The grand opening wasn't filled with the usual pomp and circumstance that came with Ethan's previous ventures. There were no extravagant parties or industry professionals mingling around. Instead, it was a quiet celebration, just the three of them, standing on the edge of the hotel's balcony, looking out at the ocean that stretched out before them. Lucy ran up to Ethan, tugging at his sleeve, her face glowing with excitement. "Look, Dad, the waves!" she exclaimed, pointing at the horizon where the sunlight caught the water in a brilliant display of shimmering blues and greens. Ethan looked down at her, his heart swelling with emotion. It still felt surreal. This idea of being a father, of being a part of Lucy's life. But as he looked out over the beach, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore, he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. Claire stood next to him, watching the same waves. But her gaze was on him. There was a quiet understanding in her eyes, a bond forged through years of struggle, misunderstandings, and finally, reconciliation. Ethan had come back not just for a business venture, but to build a life with her and Lucy. The foundation of their hotel was not just brick and mortar. It was built on trust, healing, and a shared vision for a future they could build together. Ethan placed his hand on Claire's, the warmth of her touch a grounding force in the whirlwind of emotions that had consumed him. "We did it," he said softly, a small smile tugging at his lips. Claire nodded, her own smile just as soft. "Yeah, we did." They watched as Lucy ran along the beach, her laughter ringing out, the sound carrying across the quiet afternoon. The world was full of challenges. Sure, there would be difficult days ahead, but in this moment, they were together, and that made all the difference. Ethan knew that his journey wasn't over. There would be more hurdles, more obstacles to overcome. But now, he didn't have to face them alone. Claire, Lucy, and the life they were building, this was his real legacy, the one that mattered most. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the horizon, Ethan looked out at the future with renewed hope. They had turned a chapter in their lives, and for the first time in a long time, he could truly say they were heading in the right direction. They were a family again, and this time, they would never let go. As the months passed and the hotel flourished, Ethan came to realize that life wasn't just about the deals, the properties, or the accolades. It was about the people who were there with you, standing beside you through it all. Family, love, and connection, these were the things that truly mattered. He had spent so many years chasing success, believing that it would fill the emptiness inside him. But in the end, it wasn't the material things that brought fulfillment. It was the bonds he had with Claire and Lucy. They had shown him what true wealth was: the ability to start over, to heal, and to rebuild from the ground up. Ethan had learned that it's never too late to change, to make things right, and to embrace the future with open arms. Life might not always go as planned, but love and second chances can make even the most broken pieces fit together. And as he watched Claire and Lucy from the hotel's balcony, the sun setting behind them, Ethan knew that no matter what came next, they would face it as a family. Together, they had found their way back, and this time, they would never lose each other again. If you resonated with Ethan and Claire's journey, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more inspiring stories, and leave a comment below telling us what you would do if you had the chance to start over. Your thoughts matter.